Ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Lafayette Parish School Board to order. First thing we'd like to do is stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Bergeron, would you lead us, please? Ladies and gentlemen, during the moment of silence, we would also like to keep the victims of the New Year's Eve tragedy in New Orleans and their families in our thoughts and prayers. Next will be opening comments by the superintendent, and I will be handing the gavel over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board, members of the public. Just to kind of just give you guys an update on where we are right now as far as the budget is concerned. Based upon the November board meeting and the things that were decided and the things that we were given as a task, my team and I spent an entire day on Friday, and we actually aligned all of those different asks that you guys asked us to take care of. And we have a timeline of how all of that will roll out throughout the spring. Part of that is what you have seen, and I want to apologize for the various emails. I felt that I should have warned you that some of these different things were coming about, but as you all remember from the November board meeting, we stated that we would be moving toward looking at budgetary constraints that we need to kind of look at. I want to bring this board and I want to bring the members of the public aware that we are still looking at something that is going to hit us in March with charter schools. We're still going to be looking at budgetary restraints as far as insurance because we're still not where we are there. So with all that in mind, I am trying to look at the budget and we're trying to see exactly where we can scrub and we can do to make sure that we are taking as much off of that general fund as possible. So part of what you all received and what was made known to teachers and to the public in just a recent release was that the removal of certain sections of pre-K at various sites, and there was a total of 9. The one thing that I'd like to explain to the board and explain to the public is that pre-K is not funding that we get from the state. We only get MFP dollars for K-12 students. Pre-K is funding that we get from the federal government that is flowed through the state that then comes to us. The pre-K sites that we have throughout this parish are funded so that we can actually provide that early child education. But when we go outside of the parameters of the grant and we start talking about Spanish immersion or we start talking about French immersion or anything else outside of those parameters that the state or the actual grant provides, we have to take that on in the general fund. So when we talk about 9 sections, we're really talking about 9 sections, which is 9 teachers, and a requirement to have a pre-K class as you have to have a paraprofessional by law with that teacher. So there is total of 18 people that when you remove these nine sections from the general fund, we're looking at those salaries equaling up $1 million that it's costing the general fund, to where every other pre-K, whether it's a pre-K at LEO or wherever it may be, if we have pre-K there, we're able to get that funding under the actual grant itself. But outside of that, when we start going outside of those parameters, it is weighing heavily on the general fund. Now, I'm going to just say this, and I know we have parents that are probably listening, and we have parents out in the audience. We're going to still continue to look at if things actually do change, where we can actually provide these opportunities. But this is something of which some superintendent in the past has provided this and has started this to where they went and said that general fund will pick this up, to where in every other section of pre-K, we are guaranteed that we can get funding from federal. So again, I say all of that to you is that that is the start of what I am looking at as far as the budget. I will tell you that there are several other different things that we will assure that the communication is much better. And you're going to see that, the first year I said it on the radio this morning, we had to take care of principals. We had to make sure we get the right principals in the schools. This year, we're going to really look at this budget, because I will tell you and the public, we have been wastefully spending money in this district. And I will bring some of those different things to you, and you will be amazed at some of the stuff that we're spending money on. So my pledge, number one, is to make sure that you are better communicated with when these things are coming about. And two, is that we're going to do everything that we can to prioritize what needs to be spent, which is in the classroom with teachers and students. I said it on the radio today, and I'm going to say it to you guys. My goal is to get teacher salaries to $50,000. The second is that this new accountability that's coming about, that's really going to throw districts into a whole different realm of things. I need to look at trying to incentivize teacher pay for teachers. So I say all of that to you is that those priorities have to be in the classroom. And the only way we can do that is if we have MFP dollars, which we're getting from the state, and we prioritize it there. We can't spend outside of that on things that are just not being funded by the state. So that's the close of my comments. I will then move on to 1.4, and that is election of board president and Lafayette Parish School Board 2025. I need to open up nominations for board president. So if I have any nominations, please go ahead and tell me there.
Mr. Touchette, I would like to nominate Mr. Lachele for board president for 2025.
All right, it's Mr. Britt Lodgeling.
Second.
No, but do we have any other nominations? I need to, first of all, any other nominations for board president? All right, no other nominations. Nominations are closed. Mr. President, Britt Lodgeling.
I want to start by thanking the board offering me a second term. It was my commitment when I decided to run for my third and final term. With a new board coming in, I would step up and attempt to lead the board in the first 2 years to where these new people could get their feet down. This is my last hurrah. My last 2 years, I'm going to ask to be put in a corner somewhere, and I'm going to try to keep my mouth shut. But I appreciate it. My first order of business is 1.5, which will be the election of Vice President of the Lafayette Parish School Board for 2025. I'd like any nominations.
I'd like to nominate Ms. Mason.
We have a motion from Mr. Bergeron. Do we have a second?
I'll
Second.
Okay, we have a second.
You don't need a second.
We don't need a second? Okay. Any other nominations? Hearing none, congratulations, Ms. Mason.
Thank you. Thank you.
It'll be a pleasure to serve with you a second time. My first action as president, it's not in the information items as we start information items. If you remember in December, due to circumstances, we moved our meeting to Thursday, and it worked really well with staff. It allowed staff to have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to get the agenda out to the public. We had the meeting on Thursday, which lightened up and was easier on staff on Friday. So our board meetings will stay the very same week, but they will no longer be on Wednesdays in 2025. They'll now be on Thursday. February was the 19th, it'll now be February 20th. That's how we will conduct business through 2025 and hopefully into the future. So please make note of that. Ms. Tracy, with our information department, will put that out on the website. It's gonna hit Facebook. I'd like the media to please report it. Our meetings will now be on Thursday instead of Wednesday. Our information, still 5 o'clock, no, that will not change. Thank you. Our information item is 2.1 Finance Budget Recap and Timeline for 2025, the 2026 budget process. Mr. Dugas?
Yeah, this is the budget timeline. Based on that announcement, we will be changing some of those dates to Thursdays to match up for the days that match up with board meetings so that you don't have to come in for two different meetings, with an adoption on June 11th.
Thank you, Mr. Dugas, I appreciate it. We're gonna go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. I'll read the items. Any item that needs to be pulled will be pulled by a board member. Those that are not pulled will be voted in globo. I'd like to remind the audience, you may speak on an item pulled or items not pulled, specific and germane to the topic. We do not allow comment on any other item or any outside interest. So with that being said, there will be no comments on pre-K tonight, because that is not on the agenda and it doesn't fit. So if anybody was here to speak on that, I'll apologize now. There is no agenda item. This was a superintendent's decision, not a board decision. So with that, I'll start reading the consent agenda. 3.1 is administration, discussion or action concerning the revived district calendars for the 2024, 2025, and 2025, 2026 school year. 3.2, discussion or action concerning resolution 01-025-2111, recognizing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. 3.3, discussion and action concerning resolution 01-025-2113, directing the superintendent to request a paid claims detail report from the district's third-party administrator.
Pull it.
3.4, discussion and action for graduation photography services.
Pull it.
Pull it, please.
3.5, employee services, discussion and or action concerning the 2024-2025 staff allocation formulas and guidelines booklet. 3.16 is finance, discussion and or action authorizing the superintendent and board president to close the purchase of property on Domingue Road adjacent to Acadiana High. 3.7 is finance, discussion and or action concerning the December budget to actual revisions for fiscal year 24-25. 3.8, discussion and or action concerning resolution 01-025-2112, school board member recognition month. 3.9, discussion and or action relative to amendments to the superintendent's contract. And 3.10 is discussion and or action concerning the minutes of December 19, 2024. I'll now entertain a motion that we approve all items not pulled.
I make a motion that we approve all items not pulled.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bergeron, seconded by Ms. Mason, that we approve all items not pulled. The only items, ladies and gentlemen, that were pulled was 3.3 and 3.4. Could you put the agenda up behind me, please? Is there any comment on any item not pulled? Right.
Good evening, Mr. Latchley, Mr. Touche, and members of the board.
You can have a seat.
Thank you.
Make
It's a
yourself
quick-
comfortable.
It's a quick question. I was just curious as to what was the purpose of the purchase of property that was put up as an agenda item?
Okay, public comment is for or against the item. It's not question and answer, but I make you a promise. During board comment, we'll address that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Any other public comment on any of the items not pulled? The only items that were pulled were 3.3 and 3.4. Hearing none, we'll move the board comment, and I know we have some resolutions that want to be read. And we'll address that question. The first one was Dr. Martin Luther King. Who wanted to read that one? Ms. Trahan, go ahead.
Thank you. Resolution 01-025-2111 to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday and to celebrate his contributions to our nation. Whereas contributions of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. have had a significant impact on the civil rights movement of the United States, and whereas all people of all creeds, colors, ethnic backgrounds, and socioeconomic levels can benefit from the principles that Dr. King preached, and whereas in this time of increasing violence, Dr. King's emphasis on nonviolence and calls for peace are even more poignant, and whereas in this time when many are again attempting to focus on ethnicity and race as primary considerations, the message of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that people should, quote, not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, unquote, can and should provide enlightened guidance. And whereas in this time when so many seem determined to tear apart the fabric of our society, Dr. King's plea for all Americans to transcend the things which separate and divide us so that we might reach that spiritual plateau where we can celebrate our common humanity assumes an even greater urgency. And whereas in this time when so many choose to criticize and belittle this country, Dr. King's references to America and, quote, the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, unquote, as positive ideals devoutly to be embraced and good ideas enthusiastically to be pursued can and should provide refreshing insight into the wonder and glory of our nation. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Lafayette Parish School Board does hereby support January 20th, 2025, the national holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and directs our administrators and teachers to remember this famous American through appropriate classroom and activities which focus upon his dream of unity and brotherhood of all Americans.
Thank you, Ms. Trahan. And I'd like everyone to please remember Lafayette Parish School System will be closed Monday, January 20th in remembrance of Dr. King and everything he stood for. Any other board comment? Any other resolutions to be read?
Mr. Lachley, if you wouldn't mind.
I do not.
Thank you so much. We would like to go ahead and honor our school board itself this evening with Resolution 01-023-2052. Whereas the mission of public schools is to meet the diverse educational needs of all students and to empower them to become competent, productive contributors to a democratic society and an ever-changing world. And whereas the local school board members are committed to children and believe that all children can be successful learners and that the best education is tailored to the individual needs of the child. And whereas the local school board members work closely with parents, educational professionals, and other community members to create the educational vision we want for our students. And whereas the local school board members are responsible for ensuring the structure that provides a solid foundation for our school system. And whereas the local school board members are strong advocates for public education and responsible for communicating the needs of our school district to public and the public's expectations of the district. Therefore, it be resolved that the Lafayette Parish School Board declares January 2025 as School Board Recognition Month and urges all citizens in recognizing the dedication and hard work of our local school board members and in working with them to mold an education system that meets the needs of both today and tomorrow's children. This is certified by, I understand, as Secretary Treasurer of the Lafayette Parish School System, do hereby certify and forego above and foregoing, it is a true copy of a resolution adopted as its regular board meeting on January 8th, 2025, at which time a quorum was present and that same is full force and effect. Signed by Francis Touchette Jr., Secretary, Treasurer, and Superintendent of the Lafayette Parish School Board. Thank you, school board members, for your dedication.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner. I would like to use privilege and ask Mr. Dugas. Mr. Dugas, could you please just give us a little brief explanation on 3.6, the purchase of the land at Acadiana High and why it was purchased?
Yeah, we have been speaking to the Saloon family for about 15 years in the interest of purchasing this property. The biggest thing it does is gives us access to Domingue Road. Currently, Acadiana High is landlocked onto Rue Iberville. We were recently informed that they will be shutting down Rue Iberville for an extended period of time to replace the bridge that is about to fail on that road. So this would give us access, permanent access to Domingue Road, and also for additional parking and egress and ingress for the football game, since it is near the football field.
Thank you, Mr. Dugas. Before we go to vote in recognition of School Board Member Month, I want to thank the board for the work in 2024. It was not an easy year for some of you. It was your first year. I'm sure it was a rude awakening. I'd also like to take time to thank Ms. Mason, who served as my vice president, and her leadership and dedication and just the support she provided me by sitting at my right hand was valuable, and I appreciate it, Ms. Mason. And Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Yeah, they're quick.
8 for, none against.
Motion carries. We'll now move on to the two items that were not pulled, that were pulled. 3.3, that one was pulled by Mr. Hidalgo. That's discussion on our action concerning resolution 01-025-2113, directing the superintendent to request a paid claims detail report from the district's third-party administrator. Mr. Hidalgo?
I know we look alike, but
Well, y'all sound alike.
let's not go there. All right. I recommend that the board adopt resolution 01-025-2113, directing the superintendent to request a paid claims detail report from the district's third-party administrator.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Bergeron, seconded by Ms. LeBeau. Any public comment? Any board comment?
Yes. So I wanted to direct this to our legal guy over here, Mr. Hammonds. So Hammonds, can you kind of discuss some of this from the legal perspective? Because we had some questions around the data in the report, and whether or not there's personal information in this, whether or not there's potential violations of federal law with regards to HIPAA. Can you discuss some of the language in here and the report content and et cetera?
Well, most of the information is going to be public. However, anything that would individually identify an employee, a member of the employee's family who was receiving services through the health care provided through the school system would be personally identifiable information, which is not subject to release. And if you notice the last paragraph, the further be it resolved paragraph at the bottom, we say that this shows the purposes for which the report will be used in accordance with applicable privacy laws and regulations. So that was designed to address HIPAA. That was designed to address all PII laws that are in effect with regard to confidentiality. So I can assure you that the intent here is that there would be no personally identifiable information about anyone released as a result of the request for this report.
I appreciate it. And just from my comments here, like anybody, especially retirees who have been sitting through countless insurance committee meetings and other board meetings, we have some issues around costs with our insurance program. We know that. We've gone over it time and time again. Speaking as someone on the insurance committee, right? Like we have to look at some of these costs to make sure that the amount that we're paying is appropriate, that we're not, and B, that in case there is any kind of, issue around payments or whether or not we're getting the right discounts on some of these medical exams and other claims. Like, we have to make sure that we're doing our due diligence through this as individuals on this board with regards to finances. So I just want to say that this isn't any kind of, we're not doing this just to look at people's medical claims or medical histories. We're trying to make sure that we are doing all of our due diligence so we don't have to increase premiums if we don't have to.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Any other board comment? Ms. LeBeau?
Thank you for Mr. Bacheron and Mr. Hammonds for clarifying it would be de-identified data so that nobody's privacy would be, violated. But I did want to say that we had several calls today about budget and obviously the concerns the superintendent brought up. And so, just for an overview for the public, I think our last year's budget was around $798 million. Does that sound correct, Mr. Dugas? And 1/8 of that, or close to $100 million, was insurance alone. So just wanted the public to know that 1/8 of the entire school board budget is just in insurance claims and all this. So I think it's a very timely ask and a very responsible ask for us to be looking at this very closely. So I appreciate it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those are the right numbers. And it might even be a little bit more than the $100 million. So, so this is 1/8 of our budget, and I think we need to really hone down on it. So thank y'all for taking the initiative to do that. Thank you.
Any other board comment? Mr. Dalgo?
Just briefly, board members, I want to take this opportunity to remind each one of you that this health insurance plan, we as the board of trustees of this plan, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the people of this district, the taxpayers of this parish. And so, again, we value good partnerships with all of our vendors. But I think that just like we are held accountable every day from our constituents, with emails, phone calls, and the decisions we make, I don't think it's unfair to hold every vendor, I don't care who it is, not just insurance, accountable. And so this is one way for us to make sure that we are not just shooting in the dark. We're taking our fiduciary responsibility seriously. And I didn't even talk about the budget. That's just our responsibility. If we get into the budget, we'll be here for an hour, right? So that's why this item is on the agenda. I didn't necessarily want it on the agenda, but the right way to do this is to get consensus from the entire elected board.
Thank you, Mr. Dalgo. Any other board comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote.
Eight for, none against.
Motion carries. The only other item pulled was 3.14, discussion and or action for graduation photography services. Pulled by you, Mr. Lejeune.
Yes, sir. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the discussion and or action for graduation photography services.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Mr. President, may I ask for either you or Mr. Hammonds to weigh in on the verbiage of the motion?
Yes.
Just to make sure that, we understand what we're making a motion for.
Are you, Mr. Lejeune, there's a recommended action under the agenda item. Is that what you're proposing, that it be approved or not approved?
I am just that we do not approve it. Yeah. Yeah, that the board authorize the superintendent to solicit quotations from qualified vendors to serve as the exclusive photographer for all high school graduation ceremonies, with the exception of Early College Academy, and to select the vendor that best meets the district's requirements.
Okay, so his action is the recommended action.
Yes. Second.
Seconded by Mr. Hidalgo. Is there any public comment on this item? Hearing none, is there any board comment? Ms. LeBeau?
I'd actually like to make a substitute motion. that the board authorizes superintendent to solicit quotations from qualified vendors to serve as the exclusive photographer for all high school graduation ceremonies, with the exception of Early College Academy and any school that has an existing verbal or written contract for graduation for 2025, and to select the vendor that best meets the district's requirements. So I just want to lessen accept any school that actually has a written or verbal contract in place for the current, the upcoming graduation, if there are any.
I'll second that.
We have a motion by Ms. LeBouf, seconded by Ms. Trahan, adding any school that has a contract already for this school year. Is there any public comment on this item? Do we have any board member comment? Mr. Hidalgo.
I appreciate the intent that Ms. LeBouf has put forth, but my concern is that it's not going to take a rocket scientist to quickly have a verbal contract tomorrow morning. So I think that that's a little, it defeats the purpose of this motion, and I'd like to either change that or respectfully ask you to vote against that motion, so that we can get to the meat and potatoes of what the intent of the original recommendation is.
Any other board comment? Ms. LeBouf?
I would expect that we're not just going to take a verbal word. We're going to need to see an email, some kind of text, some kind of information that shows that they came to an agreement on pricing, because that contract is not valid unless you have an agreement as to pricing, agreement as to date, all that stuff. So they're going to need to prove that that's already in place. So I think, in Louisiana, contracts are valid if they're not in writing. So we need to just make sure that, because this is not one that we're required right now until this motion passes to have in writing, that we need to make sure that if there is already an arrangement, they're going to have to prove that there is, then we move forward. But I know that there's been I've gotten a flurry of emails from a group that has alleged that they have a contract in place. So I just want to make sure that if they do, and that we need to make sure we honor that. Moving forward for graduation 2026, I have no problem with having it all RFP'd, and for this one, if there really is an agreement in place, I think we need to honor that and make sure that we're not, causing somebody to lose their contract.
And I think, I'm sorry.
Mr. Lejeune?
And I think there is a school that I've visited with that their graduation pictures are included in their class fees, which they've already paid. So those fees are already taken care of for this year.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Mr. Superintendent, does any school have I understand having a class fees, but paper towels are included in class fees. It doesn't mean that they've been purchased yet. So is there a school that has a contract right now with any photography service?
No, we've checked. Any school that we have, had contact with, we have nothing written. Desiree would always look at these contracts, number one, and bring them to me. So we have not signed any contracts. The only thing that I'm going to go back to the verbal, emails and so on and so forth. I'm going to just have to, you guys are going to have to be very clear of what you're going to want us to look for. And people can create things, people can do different things, that I just think that you're just opening up a can here, and that I don't want to make sure, I don't want schools to have to go back on things that they've already committed to. But when you start saying a verbal or an email, even an email, I can take an email and I can recreate an email with a date, and we can get with another party. And just things are just that where it is right now, especially how technology is. So y'all provide clarity for my team for what you guys want us to do, so that we can, because we'll have to implement this. We'll have to make sure that we get this taken care of.
Ms. Mason?
Okay. I added my name to this particular item after Hidalgo had originally proposed it, and I did so because there seemed to be a lot of happenings in our district where we have just blindly given I feel that the way that we've done it in the past has not been fair. Other people are not provided it's a public body. We're supposed to provide the opportunity for anyone to be able to bid on different services that we have. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just one particular item that we've realized, now that graduation is coming, that there isn't a fair process. I've had other photographers reach out saying, where's the opportunity to bid on this? And so trying to be transparent and fair, I think that was the intent here, and why it's on the agenda. So, this might be the first of many services that we examine. And I don't know if if another substitute motion needs to be made to direct the superintendent to do something else, but I'm not going to make that at this time. But it's definitely something that we need to look at further at many services that our parents are blindly having to pay for services for, extra things for their children. Personal experience with dealing with fundraising companies that are a nightmare for parent volunteers to deal with, and we do all the work and the company gets all the money. Like, we have to have a standard of service when it comes to, giving our parents one option, like, here's your photographer, this is what you're paying, there's no choice, and who knows if this is the best price. That's just not fair to the public. So that was the intent of this item, and, thank you.
I'll make a substitute motion.
Well, I don't think you can have a substitute motion on top of a substitute.
Yeah, you can have two.
All right?
That the board authorize the superintendent to solicit quotations from qualified vendors to serve as the exclusive photographer for all high school graduation ceremonies, with the exception of Early College Academy, and except for any high school that already has a signed binding contract dated prior to January 8, 2025, and to select the vendor that best meets the district's requirements.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
We have a motion by Mr. Hidalgo, seconded by Mr. Edmond. Any public comment on this second substitute motion? Any board member comment? Madam Secretary, I'll call for the vote on the second substitute motion. Mr. Hidalgo's motion. That is the motion we're voting on, the sub-motion. Read it, Mr. Hidalgo, before anybody votes. No, read it to make sure that, okay. No, not out loud. If that is your motion, right? Okay. I wanted to make sure.
Eight for, none against.
Motion carries. That is the final item for this evening. This meeting is adjourned.